Hello gamers and welcome back. I'm Rob, of course, or Warjack if you want to call me by my in-game name, and I am super excited to be going over these brand new freshly baked guys, new Ungoro decks. So for those of you who are new, we're going to be going over the most popular and kind of what you're going to be seeing if you go against some of these classes on the ladder. We go off and we talk about each individual class, all of the most popular decks within that class. Then we dive a little bit deeper to the deck. We talk about the deck, kind of its win condition, what you can expect from it, and basically what it's trying to accomplish. We do this for all the classes, and keep in mind, again, we're only covering the most popular decks I've seen thus far. I've seen a lot of decks, some of which are a lot more popular than others, so I'm sorry if I didn't cover, you know, that one deck you saw that one time at 3:30 in the morning. I'm kind of going to roughly go over like 90-95% of the decks that you're going to see, with the other 5%. Not say they're bad, they're just not as popular as some of these other ones. So the first class we're going to look at is Warrior, and that's going to be the Taunt Warrior. This deck is crazy good. This is our exact list that we were able to hit Legend with this month. I believe we went from rank 4 to Legend, and we had like an 80% win rate. It was crazy. Keep in mind that the deck since then, I myself haven't made modifications to this deck, but a lot of people are running Sleep with the Fishes. They're running Whirlwinds. They've subbed in a new. They've subbed in a second Alkalite of Pain. There's no Dire Horns in their deck. So I'm talking about the 6-drop Dire Horn, not the Hatchling. So there is fluctuations in this deck regarding what you can and can't sub out. Keep in mind, all of these lists are my particular deck lists. You can change them as you please, or if you disagree with a card, you're more than welcome to change that card with whatever you think is better. These are my personal lists, and I've kind of, the foundation's there. Like, we know this is Taunt Warrior, it runs Fire of Plume's Heart. The whole point is to kind of grind your opponent out, get the Ragnaros hero power, and go to town with the 2-mana 8 damage new hero power you have with Ragnaros. But, you know, the tech-in cards of how many exact taunts you need, whether you're running, you know, 8 or 10, or, you know, if you want to run Sleep with the Fishes instead of one Alkalite and a Gluttonous, those are kind of the tech decisions up to you at this point, because no list is like super refined, given that the expansion has only been out a weekish. Also, keep in mind that this video is normally posted at the beginning of every month, but because the beginning of this month the new set wasn't out, it was kind of pointless for me to make this video for 4 days later, everything to change. So that's why this video is a little late to you guys. And then I'll post a more updated one at the beginning of next month, where most of these decks will be refined, and we'll kind of see which decks drop off and don't drop off. The next list, the reason I didn't really want to go over Taunt Warrior that much is because I just released a deck guide on that, and the deck is pretty straightforward. It plays a lot of taunts. You get Ragnar's hero power, you go face. It's not too intricate. The next one's going to be Pirate Warrior. We've seen this deck for a long time now. Not that it's a new deck and we're like, wow, Pirate Warrior, never seen that before, Rob. No, it's just a deck for those of you who are, you know, this is your first most popular decks and the monthly meta video. You need to keep aware that Pirate Warrior is still very much alive. This deck is not going to be going anywhere because with this most recent standard rotation, the deck really didn't lose anything. There was very minor change to the deck, and the deck basically runs the same as it ever did. You know, it still has the Arcanites, the Frothing Berserkers, the Heroic Strikes, the Mortal Strikes, you know, the whole synergy with the weapon package in here. The only difference is we had to make some few minor adjustments in the last couple updates with the Buccaneer change, and then of course with the new rotation we had to take out Bashes, Argent Horse Riders, and Sir Finley Murgleton. So those cards basically got rotated out, and we replaced them with the Crawler, which we can use on our own patches, or maybe like a N'Zoth's First Mate, and it basically turns into a Totem Golem. Another change is the Captain Greenskin. I've always really liked this card, but I have struggled to find room for him. And now with the most recent rotation, room has now opened up for this guy. And for 5 mana, yeah, sometimes he gets caught up in your hand, but most parts being able to upgrade your weapon for free without having to have a pirate out. He's a pirate himself, so he, you know, there's the synergy there, and he's a 5/4 body. You really just can't get any better than that. So this is basically the new Pirate Warrior list. For those of you who are wanting basically a cheap deck, you don't need Captain Greenskin because it is 6,700 dust. So that's not the cheapest deck you could build, but you could get away without having him in this deck. But anyway, keep in mind, please respect Pirate Warrior, guys. It's a very still real threat, so don't make your decks too greedy, which I know a lot of you do. Our next one's going to be Warlock. There's a lot of cool Warlock decks floating around. One in particular is the new Handlock list. I'm really enjoying playing this particular list. My deck testing should be up for it. And also, I'll try to add annotations if annotations are still a thing, because I know YouTube is actually taking away annotations. I have no fucking... They said, oh, nobody uses annotations. I don't know who the fuck doesn't use annotations. Those things help so much if you make an error or anything like that. So if I can still make an annotation and put it on the top here, I will. But if I can't, I'm sorry. YouTube literally took away the annotation function. Fuck those guys. Hopefully they don't watch this video. All right, so we have the Handlock list here. The reason that this deck is now popping up and it wasn't around before is because of Reno Jackson. Reno Jackson basically overshadowed every other Warlock list, because it's like, if you're just going to run Warlock, you play Reno deck. Like, there's no point to run any other Warlock deck. You just run Reno list. You have Kazakis, you have Reno, it's GG no Re if you draw both of those cards. And you had Bran. It's fucking ridiculous. So now, without Bran and without Reno Jackson, other decks that are actually a little bit harder to play can come into light, and you really just don't have to worry about one card resetting the entire fucking game. You can tell I really didn't like Reno Jackson. Reno Jackson by himself was fine. Reno Jackson and Kazakis and Bran, you got me fucked up. So this deck, as we can see, double Molten Giant, double Faceless Shambler, double Twilight Drake. These are kind of your big dick swingers in regards to what you're looking to get in the middle of the game. Once you kind of play all those, and if they push past it, you of course have the Abyssal Enforcer and the Twisting Nether for some of that AoE. But worst case scenario, of course, Lord Draxus is your savior. As the 2-mana 6/6s every turn can basically destroy any class, unless you're playing against, you know, the Quest Warrior. They get an early rag, you can't really deal with it, and they're killing your 6/6s as fast as you can make the 6/6s, and then it kind of goes who has more value in regards to creatures. But for the most part, this deck does very, very well at outgrinding most other control decks, even mid-range decks. Against aggressive-based decks, we have a lot of taunts. So you put up a good taunt wall with Faceless Shambler, Twilight Drake, Defender of Argus, or Sun Fury Protector in between, you're good to go. You know, you have early Doomsayers, Mortal Coils, and Mistress of Mixtures for the early part. And if you happen to play against like a combo mage deck like Exodia Mage, you have double Dirty Rat to see if you can pull like an Archmage or a Sorcerer's Apprentice, so you can stop the Wombo combo. So this deck, a lot of disruption, a lot of early game removal, middle game very powerhousey, late game Draxus. Very nice to play. One of the harder decks to play in my opinion. This isn't one of those decks that you can just hop right in the driver's seat and start to pilot yourselves to like 12-0 wins or whatever trying to crazy win rate you're trying to get to. But for the most part, if you continue on with this deck, it will do well for you, and it'll also you got to put on your thinking cap, and that's always it's always a pretty good thing and not the worst thing in the world. All right, I need a sip of water real fast. All right, so the next one is going to be Discard Warlock. Not really my favorite list. I've been fiddling around with it for a little bit. This is my current list of it. I'm really not that satisfied with it, because honestly, if you're just going to run Discard Warlock, just run Zoo. Like, I'm just including this in here because a lot of people are still testing the Discard Warlock. There's a lot of cool stuff with it. You know, the Lakari Fellhound, the Cruel Dinomancers, and stuff like that. So this is basically just like a zoo. It kind of wants to do a little bit of everything, right? You want a quick zoo early starter, put a lot of shit on the board, get a lot of tempo. Towards the mid game, of course, you have the Lakari Fellhound and the Doom Guard to kind of wipe the floor with however they play. You're pushing towards, of course, getting the Lakari Sacrifice, creating imps, get ultimate value. You have the Dinomancer, because while you're discarding cards, you could discard like a Doomsayer or a Fellhound, or your Clutch Mother when she's like a 4/4 or 6/6. You get some value out of the Dinomancer. Towards the end of the game, when you're running out of cards, you should be able to have your portal by then. You're summoning imps if you happen to be low on life, because there's no healing in the deck and you're tapping. You have Lord Draxus, and again, more infinite value with the 6/6s. So you're going to easily be able to swarm your opponent once you get that portal down and the Draxus, which is kind of what this aims to do. So it can kind of burst out and beat control decks with it's a exceedingly quick start with Soulfires, Doom Guards, and all that good stuff. It can beat control decks because it has infinite value with Draxus and Portal, and it can beat mid-range decks because all of the creatures in this particular deck are statted quite highly. The Fellhound, the Doom Guard, the Tara Lurker, and all that good stuff. So it'll be a deck that will be still needs to be tested and probably modified quite a bit, but keep on the lookout for Discard mid-range Warlock. But I think this list is actually a little bit better. Just the standard Zoo Warlock, we've made some minor modifications with the newer cards. Of course, we've added in the Clutch Mother, the Devilsaur Egg, and the Ravenous. So the Ravenous can actually kill this egg, the 3-mana egg. Pop out of 5/5. This adapts twice. We've got more Doomguard and discards synergies with the Clutch Mother along with the Silverware Golems. So maybe we can discard some of those instead of discarding some of our better stuff. And then besides that, it has the normal shell of a Zoo Warlock. Oh, sorry, guys. Okay. And yeah, it has the normal shell of the Zoo Warlock. It's just a little bit better, I think, with these recent modifications. As we know, the for those of you around during Naxxramas days, the Nerubian Egg, that was a crazy card to put in your deck, and definitely helped it out a lot. So the new Devilsaur Egg is just basically a rendition of the Nerubian Egg that Zoo used to take very much control over, and utilize that. You could also, instead of the Argent Squires, go ahead and run like 2 Abusive Sergeants so you can get more value out of your Devilsaur Egg, and you're not as reliant to go ahead and have to Paradox it. But you also can still Defender of Argus the Egg, and it's not the end of the world. But yes, you of course can use the Abusive Sergeant to get the same thing done. Moving on to Shaman, there's a lot of Shaman on ladder, in my opinion, or what I've seen thus far. A lot of it's Elemental, and a lot of it's still Jade Elemental, and we'll cover both these deck lists here. So this is going to be the Jade Elemental. This particular deck runs the early game Jade package, which is the Jade Claws, Jade Lightning, and of... that's it. It just has those 2 in there. So, of course, you can't really beat Jade. For some reason, I thought Aya was in this list. I believe I changed Aya out and put in a Bloodlust, which I found to be a little bit more consistent when going against control decks, which I'll discuss in a little bit. But yeah, you've got the Firefly early game. Not too much early game, to be honest, with the Tunnel Trog and Totem Golem removal. It really hit aggro Shaman, or at least mid-range Shaman, to a point where they're not as kind of bursty in the beginning of the games. So it helped the meta out a lot, in my opinion, with it being a little bit slower. And with it being slower, there's more people running control. Control decks float around. We had Bloodlust. Bloodlust dominates control, especially if they're not killing your totems early on. You know, you have 3 or 4 totems out, which I found myself having a lot of the time because there's no reason for them to kill them because there's no Thunderbluff Valiant. Bloodlust really isn't that popular right now, so they're just like, fuck it, I don't need to kill these totems. And if they don't kill the totems, they get punished very heavily. The Spirit Echo, this deck, once it kind of runs out of value and runs out of your big mana stuff, you kind of just run out of steam. So even if you're able to Spirit Echo, you know, a Servant or just a Fire Elemental, you can still keep that Elemental roll going, which is really important. Also, keep in mind that you're going to be able to Spirit Echo totems as well. So you get Flame Tongue Totem in there, you know, you get an Elemental in there, and there's a lot of value that can come out of that little 3 mana card that you'll be surprised about. But besides that, it has the same 4 mana 7/7, so the mid game's just as powerful. They don't deal with the 4-drop 7/7. It basically can just win you the game on the spot. Heading towards your late game, you have Servant, which can generate a lot of value in regards to getting, you know, another Servant. Same thing as Dragonoid Operative, basically, is a Servant of Calamos, so you get infinite value there. Or you can make yourself like a Fire Elemental, Blaze Caller, or the Primal Lord, which are all really good. And you'll find once you start playing one Elemental, it's just like turn after turn after turn. You're just playing all of these high statted Elementals, which bounce off each other, and you just keep generating more value, especially if you add a Spirit Echo in there. It's just brutal. If you can kind of get the ball rolling, it's very snowbally. But if you fail to get the snowball rolling, it's really hard to recover. The next one's going to be the Murlock Shaman. This is I wouldn't say a super high tier deck in regards to, you know, this is going to pilot you to Legend with an 80% win rate. But I do think there is, it's at least at tier 3. It can burst some people out, man. Whether you want to run the Bloodlust or not, the fact that most of the time you're going to be able to get the Megafin by turn 5 or 6 with this particular list because the amount of Shamans you can summon. For those of you, Call in the Fisher summons 4 Murlocs and it'll count each and every one. It's not like other classes where some of the summons have to be the exact card of like a Murloc and it has to come with your hand. You have to play it. This allows you to play like Call in the Fishers and it counts as 4 right there and then. Also Primal Fin Totem, it summons the Murloc at the end of every turn, counts for it. Finja the Flying Star also counts for the Murlocs. So it really isn't as hard to play 10 Murlocs as you think. Most of the time you're able to get Megafin down by, I want to say 6 or 7 at least. It basically refills your entire hand, which means you don't need to have draw in this deck because Megafin is your draw. You don't need, you want to be able to get max Megafin value, which means you only want 1 or 2 cards, if none, in your hand when you play him. And yeah, so Bloodlust wouldn't be the worst thing you could put in the deck, and but right now this is my current list, and it seems to be doing me pretty well. More of a meme kind of deck. You can definitely cheese your opponents out though. It's really fun though. Playing Murlocs is never a bad thing. So moving on to Rogue, there's two renditions of Rogue in the Miracle class that you need to worry about. I'm gonna highlight the giant kind of Miracle Rogue that I'm currently playing, but keep in mind the only difference between Malygos Rogue and this particular list is just changing out the Arcane Giants for a Malygos and like maybe another Shiv or something like that, just any sort of direct damage or more draw mechanics, and you basically have the same thing as Malygos Rogue. I've decided to change Malygos out and with the Arcane Giants to test that because it seemed to look pretty fun. Plus the Malygos combo isn't it's not as reliable anymore because there's a lot of like really heavy control decks like Warrior and Mage out right now that even if you OTK them, you still have to get through like 2 ice blocks or like 1,000,000 armor, right? So I found being able to summon an 8/8 that can do like a lot of damage over the course of 1 to 2 turns is a little bit more consistent for me. But keep in mind that that's basically the only difference between this particular version and a Malygos version. Every other card is basically the same. In this deck, of course, with the new Razorpen Lasher and the Volley, being able to get 1-mana spells for your Gadgets and Auctioneer is easier than ever, guys, especially also with the new Sherazin Corpse Flower. This guy is a real MVP of this deck. If there's really no replacement for the Sherazin Corpse Flower, he's just... My first look at him in our review, guys, I really said it was going to be not that great. You know, playing 4 cards in a single turn, it's not really that plausible, and it maybe will trigger once, if not twice, but it's more times than not with the Gadgets and Auctioneer and all these new, you know, 1-mana spells and the value with Hallucination and counterfeit coins and just the general way this deck runs. You'll find that he just every turn almost you're able to bring this guy back and still have cards in your hand, and that's only fueling other cards in your deck like Arcane Giant and the Vespian Slayer, so or the Vile. No, I'm just gonna call him Vespian Slayer. I fucked up his name too many times already. Actually, we can call him the Slayer. Yeah, this new 5-drop Slayer guy, I said he was gonna be really good, and he is a 2 of in almost every rogue list besides the Quest Rogue, which we'll get into next. But this card he's also a real MVP, man. It is so good. All right, so looking at the Quest Rogue, or as many of you know as the new Cancer Rogue, this is kind of like every Pirate Warrior slash super secret Paladin, just any person who wants to play basically the best deck, or the best aggressive base deck. All the aggro shaman players turn to this deck within almost the first couple days. I mean, this deck, most of the time, you're able to complete the quest before turn 5, if not on turn 5, and then after that, every creature in your deck is a 5/5. From there, you just keep playing Novice Engineers, you mimic pod shit, you just keep playing 5/5s on your opponent until your opponent basically just dies. You can't, it's impossible for most decks to be able to deal with 3 to 4 5/5s every turn. Also deal with 1-mana charge, or 1-mana 5/5 charge minions like Patches, South Sea, Deckhand. It's just, this deck is crazy. There's a couple different versions though. Some run the Ignis Elementals and Firefly, which I'm showing in the list here. It adds to the consistency of being able to get to the quest as quick as possible, which is the most important part. This deck cannot win if you do not complete the quest prior to turn, I want to say 7. So adding consistency to that and guaranteeing that that's, you know, the highest rate that can possibly be, I think is key. So that's why this particular version, again, has the Elementals in it, because we want to be able to have the most consistent completion of this quest as possible, and that kind of goes for there. But this is, guys, if for those of you, there's a lot of people asking, Rob, what's the best deck to grind to legend or rank 5 or whatever? This is the deck. Like, you can, this deck, you win, you win by turn 7 or you lose by turn 7. It's a little bit longer than Pirate Warrior in regards to match length, but the consistency of the deck is crazy, because it's, even if, how do I explain this? Pirate Warrior runs out of steam, this deck won't run out of steam. This deck just keeps drawing. Like, even if you're playing a control deck, doesn't matter. If you play against another aggro deck, fine, it doesn't matter. And then you're like, Rob, okay, well, what's a weakness to this deck? You've hyped it up. I want to play it now. I want to grind. I want to hit legend. I can do it. The weakness to this deck, it does okay against other aggressive base decks, but the problem is it has no taunts and it has no healing, right? The only taunts and healing you're maybe going to get is from the Swashbuckler from your opponent's class, which means if you play against a Pirate Warrior, or you play against another rogue deck similar to this, or you play against Hunter, sometimes before you are able to get your quest done and kind of kill them over the course of 1 to 2 turns, you die yourself, because again, you have no taunts, you have no healing. So they kind of face race you is how you lose with this deck. But if somebody tries to play slow against you, they're most likely going to lose due to the fact that they just can't deal with the amount of pressure you're putting out. The next one's going to be Priest. So this is going to be the N'Zoth Priest deck we're going to take a look at. My deck testing on this should be out as well. The deck was fun. We played a little bit of it, and it did well. But just for the power of some of these other decks, like Warrior and Rogue, this deck can't keep up. I mean, it's a fun deck. I'm sure you will be able to pull off some wins with it, and it's not a bad deck to climb with or have fun with and whatnot. But if you're strictly looking for the best deck, this is probably not the way to go. We played against, for example, we played against one of the rogue deck that we just covered, and we were able to generate 4 Dragonfire potions, which deals 5 damage to everything on the board. So our opponent, which was a rogue, had the quest completed. They kept summoning 5/5 things. We continued to Dragonfire potion 4 fucking times, and it was still not enough to beat them. We still lost after Dragonfire potion 4 times. And we even completed the quest and brought our health back to 40, and we still lost. So I could just be a really bad player, and I'm just trash, or it's just this deck is just not enough to compete with some of these other decks like Warrior and Rogue in regards to the amount of pressure and power that they put out. But still, N'Zoth Priest is something you need to look out for. A lot of people are still testing it. The next one is going to be what seems to be Purify Priest or Silence Priest. This deck is actually a lot more powerful than the Death Rattle or N'Zoth Priest, and it's half the price if you're looking for a fairly cheap deck that's fun and not something a lot of people expect. With the new the Razor Leaf card, the 3 mana 4/8, it can attack, but that's why there's, Purify and Silence, and then you go ahead and you give it Taunt, and then you can Divine Spirit it a bunch of times and Inner Fire. So the win condition of this deck is basically there's 3 win conditions of this deck, depending on how you draw and what you're going to look for. So the first one is going to be playing giant statted minions, giving them Taunt, or silencing them, then giving them Taunt, and you just win basically by being able to play the Razor Leafs, the Faceless Shamblers. You pump them up, and your either opponent can't get through them, or you OTK them with like a 24 or 30 damage based on, your Divine Spirits and Inner Fire. There's 2 of them. Is grinding your opponent out or OTKing them with something crazy like Inner Fire. The other one is going to be with the Lyra, which you're going to be able to continuously combo into cheap spells. We have a bunch of cheap spells: Silence, Inner Fire, Power Ward Shield, Divine Spirit, Purify, Shadow Visions, Shadow Ward Pain. All of those cards with Lyra can allow you to continuously play basically spells over and over and over again. And if they cannot kill Lyra, you'll win the game based on off her just being able to keep making spells over the course of 1 to 2 turns. So she's like kind of in the regards of must kill from your opponent, and if they don't, it's just too much value. They just cannot deal with it. So very memey, very interesting list we have here. The next one's going to be a Dragon Priest. Okay, so originally I said Dragon Priest was going to be absolutely awful. There's going to be no way there's going to be any Dragon Priest after the rotation. BRM is gone. We lost Twilight Guardian. We lost the Twilight Whelp. We lost the Argent... what was his name? The Argent... I don't know. It was the 2 mana 2/4 with Taunt dude. We lost Corruptor. There's just too many synergies with too many cards with dragons and synergies that they're just too gone. Don't play it. Little did I know something like this was going to pop up, and this deck is actually pretty damn good. Who would have known Draconoid Operative can carry a deck all by himself? Without Operative, I don't think this deck would work near as well, but the fact that Operative is still in the picture and then Netherspite Historian can still generate Operative is a huge deal. If you're playing against any sort of control deck, being able to take their cards is entirely way too good. On top of that, Shadow Visions allows you to basically generate whatever spells you want in your deck. So if you need more Dragonfire potions, you can do that. If you need more Shadow Ward Deaths, you can do that. Pains, whatever the case may be, the Shadow Visions basically gives you more copies of really powerful cheap spells, besides Dragonfire, which is more expensive, but still a very powerful spell. And then on top of that, we have cards like the Drake here. And as we know, if we don't draw Dragonfire Potion, Priest has no way to do 1 or 2 damage effectively. Plus, they don't really have any taunts now because of the Twilight Guardian is gone. But with this new Drake, it's a crazy activator for everything else. It's a 4/8 with taunt, and it does 2 damage to everything. And you could be like, well, it does 2 damage to everything. That's kind of bad for you. It's worse for your opponent because your opponent can't actually heal their stuff back up like you can because you're the Priest. It also is immune to Dragonfire Potion, which is a big deal. We run 2 of those. And also the Glimmer Root, really good. As long as you're a pretty good guesser and you can identify what kinds of cards your opponent are playing and identify their deck, you're most of the time going to be able to get a lot of value from this 3-mana 3/3 take one of your opponent's cards, basically. So moving on to Paladin. So this is actually one of the new kind of Murlock mid-range Paladin list. This isn't my list. I think this is the only particular deck that I didn't really make any modifications. I think I changed, I think, 2 cards. I might have changed it, I don't know. But Strifecro was playing this list, and I was watching them, and I tested it a little bit. And this deck is very powerful, and I think it's going to catch on to the meta. I've played a couple people with this deck in our deck testings, if you've watched any of those recently. So it's not like a super uncommon deck that this is here, but it's definitely not as popular as, you know, the Taunt Warrior or the like the Quest Rogue. Those are probably the most 2 popular decks, but I think this is going to be a deck that definitely pops up more and more as we move along into the days of the expansion being out. I mean, the more time people can settle in and see what kind of the best decks are, people are going to start flocking towards them, as we can see, as we've seen with the Pirate Warrior and the Quest Rogue and stuff like that. So I think this is one of the next up and comers in regards to kind of really good decks to look out for. It basically, it's just the curve of it is extremely powerful. The fact that Stonehill Defender can get yourself Tyrion, it could give you more Sun Keepers, and it also could generate the, what's his name? He's the 7-mana 6/6, give both creatures to the left and right, Divine Shield. You could also get the 3-mana 2/2 legendary with Divine Shield that heals you, but he's not as powerful in this deck as he is in some other decks. So the fact that you can play multiple Tyrions is just crazy. And also just all the buffs in general. It's just a very curvy deck. There's no immediate combos that we need to stick out. It's not like, oh, this deck has to have this combo with this, or has to complete the quest. This deck is just individual, on an individual card basis. The cards in this deck are very powerful. Kind of, that's what it breaks down to. The next one's going to be the N'Zoth Paladin. And if I said, did I say Murlock Midrange Priest? Hopefully not. I meant to say Paladin. Anyway. The next one's going to be N'Zoth Paladin, a deck that we really haven't seen pop up in quite some time, but the fact that the meta has slowed down quite a bit for the most part, besides the new aggressive rogue deck and Pirate Warrior, which you guys will see, this deck can right here really shine. The reason it was suppressed for such a long time is that the decks that were out with aggro Shaman, you know, Pirate Warrior, it was like 3 or 4 really powerful aggressive based decks, and they contributed to over 50% of the decks played in the meta. Any other slow deck like this just got absolutely slaughtered unless it had Reno in it, which Reno then basically was an auto concede if you had him on turn 6. But now, like I said, the meta slowed down. Decks like this can shine. N'Zoth, ultimate value in regards to being able to bring back Tyrion. Also the fact Karen and Tyrion are big, but what makes this really powerful is the Stone Defender that can give you more Tyrions, which means you're going to be playing N'Zoth into, like, N'Zoth into Tyrion is already good. Like if you can N'Zoth into Tyrion and that's it, you've got yourself plenty of value. But the fact that you can N'Zoth into Tyrion or Cairney is really good. Most of the time with your Stonehill Defenders, you're going to be able to get a N'Zoth, or no, another Tyrion, or those 4-mana 2/3 taunt, Death Rattle, summon a 2/2 slime. So I've actually not included those in this list. I've chosen Harrison Jones in a second. Where is it? Why is there only one Aldork Peacekeeper? All right, so this list is fucked up. I done fucked it up somehow in my making of the list. What we want to do instead, I'm going to recover here. We're actually going to take out Harrison Jones. We're going to add in another Peacekeeper. And I think that'll be fine. It needs to be 2 Peacekeepers in this list. Rob, you done fucked it up big time. But yeah, so these Stone Defenders are going to be able to basically generate you Death Rattles, which is why I didn't want to include other Death Rattles in the deck, because again, just N'Zoth into a Tyrion is more than enough to outvalue most decks, especially with Elise in the deck. So you'll find that this deck, you'll see. If you play this deck, you'll understand why there's this few Death Rattles in here, because by the time N'Zoth comes, you've been Bloodhoof and or Tyrion has died, or you've generated other Death Rattles from the defender, so it's not as important. So heading on over to the Mage, we have a deck that no one thought would exist now that the standard rotation is out and it lost Ice Lance in both Emperor Tharza, and that's going to be Freeze Mage. So for those of you unfamiliar with this deck, it basically aims to kill you in one turn with the combination of Alexstrasza followed by like Fireball, Frostbolt, or Pyroblast, then Fireball, Frostbolt, or something, some combinations of cards after Alexstrasza to deal your remaining health. The reason being that everybody thought this deck was going to die is because it lost Emperor Tharzan, which people would use to reduce all of the cards in their hand by 1, allowing you to do like an insane amount of burst damage, because Ice Lances would cost 0. They can do 4 mana, 5 mana if you have like Kobold in the deck, or 6 if you have Kobold in the deck, and we also have Blood Mage, so Blood Mage and Kobold is a crazy combination as well. Yeah, the deck is persisting on with the new addition of the Primordial Glyph, which allows you to kind of pick whatever card you need in a particular situation you happen to be in. So if you need more freeze, you have it. If you need more draw, you have it. If you need another Pyroblast for 8 mana, you have it, because it reduces the cost of any card you pick by 2. Also, with the new 2-drop, 2/3 Battlecry, draw a secret from your deck. It's a crazy new minion. It's basically just a bad mad scientist, and the fact that this card is considered to be really good and a powerhouse, not the powerhouse of this deck, but makes this deck very viable again, means that Mad Scientist was just so broken that they basically just took Mad Scientist. For those of you who weren't around during the Naxxramas days, it was a 2 mana 2/2 Death Rattle, summon a secret from your deck when it died, so it basically put it into play. It was a 2 mana, have 5 mana's worth, but it also played it right there, like it just pulled it from your deck into play instead of just drawing it, and even just drawing it is really good, and definitely helps this deck out a ton. So glad to see Freeze Mage still around, and I'm sure we're gonna have a good time playing the deck. The next one is going to be very similar to Freeze Mage. It's going to be the new Quest Mage, or like people say, the Exodia Mage. So with this particular deck, it aims to kill you. It's a long combination. So the quest says you have to play, I think, 7 cards from your that aren't in your deck. So you Babbling Book, you use Kabbalist Tome, you use Primordial Glyph, stuff like this. You generate cards that aren't in your deck, you play those cards, and you get a Time Warp which skips your opponent's turn. This is all going to come together in a second. So then you save your Sorcerer's Apprentice. You go Sorcerer's Apprentice, Sorcerer's Apprentice. So you play both of them. You Molten Reflection twice. You now have 4 Sorcerer's Apprentice on the board. At this point, you go ahead and you Time Warp, skip your opponent's turn. You're back up to 10 mana. You at that point then place Archmage, Antonidas. You play any spell at all. You generate a Fireball. Fireball costs 4 mana. You have 4 Sorcerer's Apprentice out. Your Fireball costs 0. You keep fireballing your opponent's face for as long as your turn can go on for, and Archmage keeps generating Fireballs, and Fireballs are cost 0 mana. So it basically doesn't matter the life points of your opponent, how much armor they have. It just doesn't matter. You just win because you have infinite Fireballs, and that's why they call it the Exodia Mage, is because it's just, you win. If you pull off the combo and you have those cards, you win the game. The only limitation you may have is if your opponent has an Ice Block, which at that point you'd want to pop their Ice Block when you play the Time Warp, because then you could Time Warp over the turn that they would play the second Ice Block. So there is some finicky stuff you have to do there if your opponent has an Ice Block and you're playing against another Freeze Mage, or if you run out of time, because if you keep fireballing, the animation of Archmage creating the fireball and casting the fireball takes roughly 3 to 4 seconds per fireball, and if your opponent could be a warrior and they have like 80 health, it could take a little bit. So, but for the most part, it's OTK, and yeah. So you're like, okay, well, Rob, this deck is unbeatable. How do I beat it? It's going to beat me in one turn eventually. How do I stop this? Any aggressive or mid-range deck that puts constant pressure stands a really good chance against this deck, because again, this deck requires a lot of cards to set up a combination to be able to kill you in one turn, which means they can't utilize every card in their hand to do what they want to. Certain cards are like strictly, you know, Molten Reflection, Sorcerer's Apprentice, Archmage. That's 5 cards that they can't play at a given time. So their hand could be 7 cards, and 2 of them are the only cards they can actually play, because all of the rest of the cards are part of a combo. So that's its weakness. All right, moving on to the next deck, we have my super secret Time Warp Tempo Mage deck. Long name, I know, cool deck. Thank you. So this basically, it doesn't need any sort of particular way to win. It has multiple win conditions. Hopefully the deck testing is on this is out, so you can guys, you kind of get a feel for how this deck can win a game. So you can either win a game by tempoing out your opponent by basically just getting in a lot of chip damage with the Mage, the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and your 2-mana 2/3 that summons a secret. You get them down to 15, then you could basically just fireball, frostbolt, any number of spells. The Primordial Glyph can generate a Pyroblast, more fireballs. Cabalist Tome, you play 2 of those generate more tomes or more value. There's just so much value in this deck. It's so hard to run out of steam. It has a lot of burst because it's a mage. On top of that, if you ever get to the point where you're like, shit, I can't seem to win through tempo or burst, then at that point you start setting up for the time warp kill with the giants and the Waygate. So there's just a lot of different routes that you can navigate with this deck, depending on what you want to do. And all during that time, you have counter spells in the deck, so you can play them at strategic points at which your opponent, you know, they're going to be doing certain things that you don't like. So against another mage, I will always try to counterspell on turn 6 or 7 to stop a Flame Strike or a Blizzard. I will also, if we're playing against an Exodia mage, I'll always play a counterspell before I think they're going to do their, you know, big Exodia combo, and I'll be able to stop their time warp or a Molten Reflection, so they can't actually play infinite fireballs. So there's just a lot of counterplay in this deck, and a lot of knowing which kind of win condition to kind of go against based on your opponent. So like against a warrior, you probably want to go with either beat them down as quick as possible, but if your hand is looking super value oriented, go with the OTK with the giants. So it all depends. It all depends. So moving on to Huntard, there's only one deck for Hunter that I think is viable, and it's kind of only the one that you're gonna see on ladder. The Quest Hunter is just not good. A lot of people are still testing it, and I'm sure it works sometimes, but I found a lot more players actually pushing towards just a mid-range Hunter deck, and it looks very familiar, very similar to the build we have here with the Tundra Rhino, the Highmanes, the Swampkin Dread, and that's kind of where it levels out at. The rest of it's just being able to play basically a minion every turn up until your Savannah Highmane, put in that chip damage, and be able to burst them down with Dread or kill commands. Also, the Rat Pat, the Unleash the Hounds, and the Infested Wolf are able, those in combination with your Hyena can win you games alone. The Hyena is an incredibly powerful card if you can just keep killing off those 1/1s, which this deck can generate quite easily with cards like I mentioned, Alley Cat, Infested Wolf, and Rat Pat. And the Tundra Rhino allows you to attack right away with those 1/1s to buff up that Hyena to be able to basically attack your opponent right away for, like, you know, 12 to 15 damage burst for just 1 minion attack, not to mention all the rest of the chip damage you've done and plus your hero power. So this would be a deck that would counter the Rogue which we talked about earlier. It definitely does really well against Taunt Warrior as well. So for as silly as it seems, Midrange Hunter, I think, is the counter to most of the really popular decks right now. If you continuously find yourselves going against Taunt Warrior and Rogue, or Quest Rogue, just play Hunter and you'll be able to basically cream the crap with them. This is a Rogue and Warrior killer right here. Not every game, it's not 100% win rate, guys, but more times than not, you'll be able to cheese them out with the Hunter. So moving to the Druid, a very, very cool list, and a list I'm wanting to play a lot, and I'm going to try to play it on stream either tomorrow or later tonight, is the Ramp Druid. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with how Ramp Druid works, it has only basically high mana creatures, and you have cards like Innervate, Wild Growth, Jade Blossom, and Mire Keeper to try to accelerate, and Nourish, of course, to accelerate your mana. To basically, while your opponent will have 4 or 5 mana, you already are at 10 mana. You're playing cards like Deathwing, Yashards, Ysera, Primordial Drake, Curator, draw more cards, but even Anaconda, which is a recent inclusion in this new set. So you're able to, let's say, play a turn 4 or 5 Anaconda. Anaconda whips out like a Bog Champ or like a Yashard. Yashard brings out like a Deathwing, and it's just GG. Like, it is just, once you get like 2 giant minions before it's even turn 7 or 8, most decks can't keep up with that unless they've drawn like both of their hexes. The weakness to this deck is drawing all of your high mana creatures and not any of your ramp, or drawing like, I would even say drawing all of your ramp is fine, because eventually you'll draw creatures, and there's a lot of draw in the deck with Curator and Nourish. So yeah, the only weakness is drawing like all of your creatures no ramp, and then you just die to turn 4 or 5 to like an aggro deck. But if you go against any control deck with this deck, you'll absolutely slaughter them. There's no control deck in the game that can deal with this many large scale minions. Like it's just GG no re. So this is gonna be a really fun deck to play against like Taunt Warrior that thinks they're gonna be able to outvalue us. Oh no, let's see how Sleep with the Fishes does against a 12/12. You know what I'm saying? So the next and last deck is going to be the Token Druid, which I think is a little bit more popular for sure. More so than the Ramp Druid. So I'd have to say it's like 75-25 in regards to Token Druid versus Ramp Druid. You could be like, Rob, where's Quest Druid? I want to see Quest Druid. Quest Druid, I played hundreds and hundreds of games. I don't want to say hundreds and hundreds, like hundreds and hundreds of games. And we haven't seen a single Quest Druid. I've never played against a single Quest Druid. I've played more Hearthstone this season than the past like 2 or 3 seasons combined. So, and it's only like day, what? 12. So that should tell you something. So with that, I think the Ramp Druid is just a better version of Quest Druid, and then the Token Druid being the more aggressive based one. So with that, again, playing a bunch of small minions, very similar to any token deck if you're familiar with Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering. It's very similar. You play a lot of low-scale minions that have a lot of high-impact value, like Runt and Firefly, keep generating stuff, the Egg. From there, you power them up with Power of the Wild or the Mark of the Lotus. From there, you're able to Savage Roar and deal like 15 to 20 damage in a single turn. Defender of Argus also buffs them up. But if that doesn't seem to do it and they wipe your board early on, you can always Living Mana, which means if they don't kill your board, you win because you're just going to be able to Savage Roar a board full of Living Manas. Or if they kill your Living Mana, it just turns right back into mana and you're able to play the next play with it the next turn, and your opponent probably used most of their CC, which means if you have like a Hydra and a lot of more smaller minions or another Living Mana, you can pull up some cheesy wins that way as well. Also, this deck runs the water package, so on top of having to deal with all of these other minions that you're playing, the Savage Roar combo, Living Mana, and a 5-drop 8/8, they still have to deal with now Finja on 5, which could generate you a lot of value through summoning like a War Leader and a Charge minion, which is just more minions for Savage Roar, a Mark of the Lotus, or Power of the Wild, and Mark of the Lotus. So there's just a lot of inherent synergies within the decks with summoning minions, getting a lot of value from them, and then comboing them with, of course, Savage Roar. So with that, that's going to wrap up our most popular deck guides as of now. Keep in mind, guys, that as this video becomes more and more towards the later of the month, like, you know, you watch this on the 25th of this month, some of these decks maybe not exist anymore, or they've changed a little bit. A new video of this comes out at the beginning of every month, so, you know, towards the end of the month is its most outdated period. So just keep in mind when you're watching this, and keep in mind I can't change the decks once I make this video. And if I left anything out, or if you like to add on to any of these decks that I've gone over, of course I can't go over everything. That's what my deck testings and the deck guides are for, so we can actually dive into specifically one deck and really hammer out all the synergies and powerhouse parts to that deck as we can. That's what those are for. So with that, as always, guys, I'm Robert Warshak, and happy whatever the hell days are. Whoa, I fucked that up. Happy whatever the hell day it is. My voice is killing me.